And now for something completely different.
So after we were reviewing the footage from last week where I tore into the carburetors and discovered that I had installed the floats incorrectly, I found that there was a hidden metaphor in this particular project. A lot of times when I'm working on stuff, I find that machinery, motors, things that fit together like a puzzle are often really good metaphors for life. The long and short of what happened was with the tool carbs, there's the bowl and the set of floats with the needle valve, you know, sits in there. And when I was going through them for the umpteenth time, I'd had a fleeting thought about what might be the problem, but I think I was taking the carbs off at the time and I didn't really stop to acknowledge the thought and to think about, oh, okay, I need to double check that. I was too caught up in what I was doing and of course in the direction that I've been going, which is going through the process of the path that the fuel takes from the tank through the petcock, through the splitter, and then into the carbs and making sure that was all clear. Once I had eliminated that, I had just started to mess with the floats and the needle valve. My wife happened to be standing there next to me. She said, hey, is there any chance that maybe those floats are upside down? Just then, I remembered that thought I had had. I remember turning to look at her, and I'm sure the expression was on my face of, and it just became super clear to me at that moment. That's it. I'm sure that's it. The reasoning behind putting them on backwards, I had taken them completely off, not really taken notice of how they were installed. And the larger part of the float on these particular carbs goes actually down here, fits in this way. The bowl goes down that way. So I was thinking, well, the larger part of the float would go into the bowl. That was my thinking, and I just automatically stuck with that. Well, that is not the case with these. So they were always shut. Pretty much they were just shut all the time. I was trying to be thorough, go through everything, check everything, make sure everything was where it was supposed to be, except that in my thinking was there was a blockage, there was something in the way, and if I just went through the entire process, I would find an obstacle of some kind that was standing in the way of the carbs working properly. And the reality was that there were no obstacles. Nothing was blocking the fuel. It was my perception of what I was looking at. So in reality, it was my paradigm, what I thought the floats should be doing, the way I thought they should be installed. The paradigm that I had in my mind of what should be happening with the carbs was the problem. I wasn't missing any parts. There was no actual obstruction. The fuel was going where it was supposed to go. It was my perception of what I was looking at. In reality, it really was just my view. The way I was looking at what was in front of me was the problem. It had nothing to do with the machinery itself. All the parts were there. I just wasn't seeing it right. I immediately flipped them both over, put the bowls back on, put the carb in, which takes a little bit of time. But once I had that in, it fired right up. And I mean, instantly. It didn't even crank once, more than once, before the engine took right off. So all of that time, all that was standing in my way was my own perception of what I was looking at. And often in life, I think we do that. We think that we can eliminate a problem or tackle something and get it out of the way, when really all we might need is just to look at it differently. In this case, I was the problem, not the carbs, not the bike, not the fuel. So an example comes to mind from my own life, in my own family. My youngest son was always really creative. He would get into his own head and really get into his own imagination, and he could kind of cocoon himself and isolate himself with his creative ideas. At the time, he was pretty little. I want to say around 8, 9 years old, maybe even younger. And I found myself having a hard time connecting with him. My older 2 kids, we found common interests in certain things and hit it off fine, but I found myself at a loss as to how to consistently and regularly connect with my youngest son. And for a while, I spent a lot of time trying to change him and his perception of life and how he should interact with the world, trying to change his behavior. That went on for a while, and I remember thinking, if I don't figure this out, me and this kid are not going to have a relationship. I realized me trying to change his nature, trying to mold him into something that I could better relate to, was not working. And believe me, I did it for a while. I want to say it could have even been more than a few years. But when I openly realized I've got to be the one to figure this out, one thing that I could do that I saw he and his brother doing all the time was to play video games. I thought that's an area I can bend in, even though I had really absolutely no interest. So I just decided I was gonna sit down and play on their GameCube and learn to play their games. And it took a little bit for me to get into that and to really start to learn to enjoy it. But I did realize that was something I could do. And when I changed my perception from how can I change him or mold him or affect myself onto the situation and realized I could change it, we began to connect. I even began to enjoy playing video games. My son's in his 20s now, and that's still something that we enjoy doing, me and my kids. To this day, we do that together, even over hundreds of miles, as most of them live far from where I do. So just like my perception of the floats just needing to be flipped, really all I needed to do was flip the responsibility or my approach to my son to something I had control over, something I could change. And really, it was something I could change pretty easy. That's just an example of how I think the shop and stupid little things like fixing a carb can be really great lessons in life. So that was just something I wanted to share and put in here before we go on with the projects that we're currently in. If you caught some of the previous videos, the next big project is the old Ford F-250, and I have been working on that, and we'll get into that a little deeper, and I'll show you how far we've gotten on that and how much farther we need to go. So if any of you had similar situations or even have gleaned some interesting metaphors from working in the shop, be sure to leave it in the comments below and tell me what you think. Appreciate everybody who's joining in. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.